Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Ken Fellman. I'm moderating this session. Before we start talking about the impacts of changing markets on localism, would you please join me in thanking NATOA's Board of Directors and staff for getting Chairman Wheeler to our conference this year. We have been trying to do that for the past 20 years, and we've had commissioners, and we've had some other really great speakers, but we've never had an FCC chairman. I mentioned that to somebody last week, and they said, well, congratulations for getting that done. I said, no, I was the guy who was trying all those years that they said no, and it's other people who deserve the credit. So we're here today to talk about how some of these significant transactions that are going on at the national level are impacting localism and what's happening in our communities and what a couple of communities are doing about it. And we have three great speakers. Mary Beth suggested that I simply say they're all really smart, they all went to really great schools, and they have a lot of good things to say. But I'm actually going to tell you a little bit about their bios, and I'm going to go in the order that they are speaking in. So we're going to start with Rondella Hawkins. Rondella has over 24 years of experience working in local government. Currently, she's the Telecom and Regulatory Affairs Officer for the City of Austin, Texas. She is the single point of contact for Austin for the Google Fiber project and the AT&T Fiber project. She's responsible for developing the city's community technology and digital inclusion initiative, and that consists of city-initiated programs to provide Austin residents with access and training on digital and communications technologies. She serves currently as Vice President of TATOA, the Texas chapter of NATOA. She's a former board member of NATOA, and I've had the privilege of working with her in that capacity. She was selected as NATOA's Co-2010 Member of the Year, and her husband, Fred, is the biggest, best Denver Broncos fan in the state of Texas. Next, we will have Mary Beth Henry, and Mary Beth is the staff director for the Mount Hood Cable Regulatory Commission. She manages the Office of Community Technology at the City of Portland, Oregon. She was appointed by Oregon's governor to represent cities on the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council, and she's a member of the Oregon League of Cities Broadband Standing Committee. She's been developing or has developed Portland's broadband strategic plan, and we're going to hear a little bit from her about what's happening in Portland on these issues. She is also a former president of this organization, and to me, she's a cherished colleague. She was president of NATOA just preceding my opportunity to serve as president, so we got to work very closely together during some very trying times, and I thank her for all the help and benefit that she's provided to this organization over the years. She also is a great outdoors person, and if you become Facebook friends with her, you're going to see some great photographs of bike trips and hiking trips, and she goes on all these trips that make me jealous. And lastly, we're going to hear from Joe Van Eaton, and Joe is going to try to tie together some of the stuff that Rondella and Mary Beth talk about that are happening in their communities with some of the mergers that are pending and what we as local governments can do to ensure that the effect of those transactions don't negatively impact the ability to do the kinds of things that Rondella and Mary Beth are going to talk about. Joe is a partner in Best and Krieger's municipal law practice group in the firm's Washington, D.C. office. Before joining the firm in 2011, he was a named partner in Miller & Van Eaton, as most of us know, nationally recognized telecommunications law firm. I've had the privilege of working with Joe on a number of different cases, and I can say without reservation he is one of the smartest lawyers that I know. He's also a great skier, and I like Joe better when he vacations in Colorado than when he vacations in Utah, because he invites me to come ski with him when he's in Colorado, but he hasn't done that for the last couple of years, so hopefully by putting some pressure on him in this way, he will come to Colorado next winter, and we can spend some quality time together. And with that, I will let Rondella start us off.
Well, Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to share our journey in Austin so far about broadband deployment since Google's announcement to build a gig network to residents and small businesses and its impact on our community. I remembered. I thought it would be helpful to provide a few facts about Austin. And the U.S. Census Bureau estimated the 2013 population to be 885,000. The MSA population is about 1.9 million. Austin's the 11th largest city in the U.S., and Forbes listed Austin as the fastest growing city for both 2012 and 2013. As far as the net migration, we have 158 people moving to Austin each day. And if you take out the net with the people moving out, it's estimated about 110 residents moving to Austin every day. We are experiencing significant population increases. The City of Austin's full-purpose area and land size is 272 square miles. And besides that, Austin is a hub of innovation and entrepreneurship, and we have a booming technology center. So the impact areas that I want to cover today are city resources, provider service improvement, the response by the incumbent providers in Austin, the impact on residents, and digital inclusion. So Austin has not seen this level of right-of-way construction by cable TV or broadband service providers since the early 2000s. That's when we had a significant number of companies coming in and wanting to install networks. You know, with all the community benefits of increasing broadband capacity in Austin, all of the activities surrounding it have a significant impact on city resources. And that's including staffing, the public and private utility infrastructure that's in the rights-of-way, and with the activities, there's disruption in the public rights-of-way as well as in the neighborhoods. The activities for construction, the traffic impacts with the construction, yard excavation, and pole replacement. The construction activities are both aerial as well as underground installation, and the digging and trenching in the right-of-way and accessing utility easements in residents' yards, that causes some disruption. The aerial construction of fiber to utility poles requires, at times, some poles to be replaced when the existing poles will not accommodate any additional load, additional fiber. So that requires existing attachers to that pole to relocate their attachments to the new pole, and from time to time there could be a time lapse in between the removal of the old pole and the new pole. So you may have two poles existing beside one another. But in order to minimize the disruption to our community and to process the sheer volume of permits, we pulled together a dedicated staff teams to coordinate our permitting processing. And we were able to go through our existing permitting processes and consolidate some steps in which to streamline the permitting time, which, you know, by our code, it can take anywhere up to 60 to 90 days for excavation permits to be issued. That is based upon us getting complete and accurate information. And we developed some requirements for an accelerated permitting process to accommodate these citywide, you know, voluminous number of permits, and our goal is to issue a permit in 30 days. And that is based upon the complete and accurate permit applications. With that additional workload, we've hired additional temporary staffing to accommodate the increases. And we have had a pool of some retirees that we were able to bring back online. I mean, their knowledge, and it's much quicker for them to get up to speed with city processes. And, you know, the level of interest, I mean, with all this broadband network deployments in Austin, there's a lot, you know, high level of interest by media, by other communities, and it takes a good amount of time, you know, to share your story with other communities, with the media. You want to tell your story, you want to share best practices and share information to learn from one another. But that does take time. And there is the 311 call centers, the takers, they, you know, there will be an increased level of calls about the right-of-way activity, you know, residents calling in, concerned with what's happening in my backyard, and so that you just need to be prepared for that. So as far as service improvement, this slide here depicts like the benefits and the increases in broadband speeds by all of our providers following Google Fiber's announcement to build in Austin. And our customers, the Austin broadband customers, have experienced service improvements. As you'll see, the Google announcement was April 14th of 2013 to deploy 1 gig in Austin, and AT&T announced that day that they would provide 300 meg service to their customers with plans for 1 gig. And Grande Communications, they were an overbuilder in Austin in the early 2000s and built out to a small portion of the Austin area. But at that time, in the early 2000s, Grande had the foresight. They actually built fiber to the home in a very small part of Austin. So it didn't take them much time or effort to upgrade their electronics, and they are offering 1 gig in that neighborhood, and they are rolling out gig in some other communities where they operate just south of Austin. And Time Warner Cable, they are providing free Wi-Fi for their customers, and in April of this year, they upgraded their service to 300 meg to citywide, because they are built out citywide in Austin. And so we have seen the broadband prices drop across the board. And Google will provide the 7 PEG channels that Austin has in HD format. We think that's a big improvement for our residents and for our PEG providers. The impact on residents. Now we know that the network I discussed the network construction, the impacts on the neighborhoods, but there also are benefits of the local jobs that are created, the hotel bed tax revenue from non-local contractors coming in, and as well as increased sales tax revenue, restaurant, shopping. So those are some added benefits. The anticipated community benefits. We've heard, in earlier sessions as well as what the benefits from energy conservation management apps are, telemedicine and educational opportunities. But there's also the teleworking is for us, because of the traffic congestion that Austin is experiencing with the growth. We are towards the top of a list that we really don't want to be, and that is we are the 4th worst congested city. And for all of the successes, transportation is the #1 challenge for our city, and that continues to grow. So with true high-quality video conferencing, large data file sharing will be made possible through these gig networks, and that's where teleworking comes in. So that will be a tremendous benefit to employees and to our companies to help alleviate some of the traffic woes. Another benefit of what we're seeing with the broadband deployments is it's been a catalyst for civic engagement, and the city has expanded its digital initiatives. Open data, that's a real priority for us to make more and more of our city data available to residents for civic applications deployment, civic hacking. There's more emphasis on digital inclusion programs. And as far as the economic and workforce development, the impact. So our Chamber of Commerce is now using gigabit internet as a tool for recruiting companies when they go out and try to attract businesses to move to Austin, which is a big benefit for creating jobs for our economy. And Austin has roughly 38,000 small businesses, and 80% of those employ 20 or less employees. And 80% of those businesses employ 20 or less employees. And Forbes has named Austin #1 for small business development. And we anticipate that more small businesses will be created, and our existing small businesses will benefit from this gig. Another community benefit, the Community Connections Program. Google Fiber offered their Community Connections Program, in which the city received 100 connections, and we selected 100 nonprofit and public sites to receive a free gig. The 100 sites represents 59 separate organizations, and it was a very competitive process. We had received 300 applications from asking people to submit proposals on how they intended to use the gigabit speed, to improve their service delivery, and to build upon their digital inclusion programs. But ultimately, we did select a very diverse set of organizations, and the categories that we developed for them was arts, culture, and community, social, health, and well-being, public facilities, which are libraries and parks and rec, and education, workforce, and higher ed. So this is an example of River City Youth Foundation. They serve some of Austin's most underserved residents in the Dove Spring neighborhood, and they have technology empowerment and access programs that trains 200 plus low literate parents and 400 children annually. They will be receiving they are on the list, the proposed list to receive a free connection to operate their 24-hour public computer lab. We received many compelling applications, and it was difficult to narrow down the 300 to only 100, but all of our applications for the 100 they're all online on our open data site, and it's really interesting to go through them to see what types of uses that the organizations will come up with. And those nonprofits that received a connection will be able to reallocate the money that they pay for broadband services. They can reallocate that into providing direct services with their program. Digital inclusion. So in 2010, we conducted a residential technology survey, and at that time, there were 65,000 residents who did not use the internet, which is 8% of Austinites. And the common theme, and I think all the Pew studies and all, I think the other studies that cities conduct, is one of the reasons is relevancy, or not understanding why they need to get on the internet. And of course, the other is affordability. So we're updating our survey for 2014, and we should have a final report at the end of, about the end of this month. It's October. So we're hoping to see, with all the the broadband deployments, we're hoping to see numbers drop, and we are focusing our efforts citywide on digital inclusion, a digital inclusion strategic plan. And since Google's entry into Austin, I think the discussion and interest about broadband access and adoption and digital inclusion, it's been elevated even further. I mean, Austin has historically supported public access computer labs. I'm very committed to digital inclusion, and we're really, we've been, I think at one time we were deemed like, #1 wired city. But I think that the discussion about the need and the importance has risen to a higher level, and our city council passed a resolution directing the city manager to develop a digital inclusion strategic plan. And we have a steering committee that was appointed, and we broke it out into sectors: business, entrepreneur, community-based providers, that's your social service providers, education, higher ed, the city library, the IT department, the economic development department, and a public health organization, as well as our community technology and community development commission member. We had an appointee, and the community development focuses on your public housing authority projects or properties. And we are using the ICMA, the 7 principles of digital inclusion, as the framework to develop our plan with an Austin context, and those principles are availability, affordability, consumer safety, digital literacy, public access, relevance, design for inclusion. And these were principles that were discussed in yesterday's panel about digital inclusion. And what the plan will do is analyze what Austin's assets are related to digital inclusion and try and identify actionable initiatives in which we can create a more fully engaged society. It was interesting during this process. We came to the conclusion that Austin does have the resources and the talent, the knowledge, and the expertise to address the challenges that we face with bridging the divide. But the real problem is that we must connect with what's available to what's needed, and determine how partners and organizations can work together to best address this issue. And we are in the process of finalizing the plan, and we will report to council in October for adoption, and then the fun begins of implementation. So this map here is just, it's not all-inclusive. It just demonstrates that Austin's a hub for high-tech companies and creativity and business, and we anticipate that there'll be more and more companies and small businesses that on this map as a result of high-speed broadband, and really glad that the importance of broadband from a digital inclusion perspective and economic development has been realized, and look forward to seeing all the transformation and the innovative applications that will be developed with high-speed internet. And last, I had to throw up a picture of Willie and his statue. We invite you to come to Austin, and you can go see Willie's statue, which is right across from Austin City Hall and at the Austin City Limits Moody Theater. And that wraps up my presentation. Hello from Willie.
We'll wait till Willie decides to move on, maybe. Hi, I'm really happy to be here with my friends and colleagues on this panel. And it is definitely true that pending mergers and changing markets will continue to have a profound effect on local governments and the public. Chair Wheeler was absolutely correct. The times, they are a-changing. But let's remember the landscape here. The transition from the public switch telephone network and classic cable TV to a broadband internet network of networks is the most important communications technology and policy event in nearly half a century. As important in its own way as the advent of the telegraph, the telephone, and broadcast radio and television in the 1920s. But instead of bemoaning the degree to which technology may supersede our statutory framework, let's recall that the 1934 Communications Act, amazingly, already provides many of the policy tools we need to apply to a broadband environment. In the FCC's own words, competition, diversity, localism, and encouraging the provision of advanced services to all Americans remain among the principal objectives of the Act. Recall that the principle of localism historically was critical in two areas: application by the FCC in broadcast licensing matters and application by local governments in cable franchising matters. In fact, localism, through the cable franchising process, was enshrined in the '84 Act, where local governments were recognized in statute as the primary judges of community needs and interests in the renewal process. And in fact, many of us undertake regular and extensive ascertainment of our local communities in that regard. But what a difference 30 years makes. Based on recent merger approvals, the Comcast, NBC, Universal, the proceeding of the potential FCC two-track net neutrality proposal, Comcast, Time Warner, AT&T, DirecTV. There are a lot of proceedings at the FCC, and some of us are concerned, Wilson, North Carolina, Chattanooga notwithstanding, that it's possible that the principle of localism may be left in the dust. But it's fair to ask, does this have to be the case? Is the architecture of the internet so inherently global that long-standing principles of localism in media have become irrelevant? Absolutely not. We in Portland have been working very hard to ensure that localism is alive and well. We're encouraging internet deployment, competition, and localism. And we need, all of us, to remind the FCC that localism is one of the guiding principles of the public interest standard that governs all FCC actions. So some of the things, we're ringing the alarm clock here on localism. We provide in our cable franchises and continue to financially support a thriving community media environment, hundreds of hours of local original programming, and everyone with an internet connection can get this programming, and it's also available in HD. Many hours of local programming are archived and available on demand. And we brought our commitment to localism to our broadband strategic plan with specific local initiatives in economic development, public safety, transportation, education, and health. Our commitment to localism is clearly a driver for competition and deployment. For example, after adoption of our broadband plan, Portland was selected among a few cities for expansion of Google Fiber. Our incumbent local exchange provider, CenturyLink, who I'm happy to see is sitting in the room, plans to deploy fiber to the premises in some areas, and this will provide additional infrastructure as well as additional competitive choice in the cable and internet space. Our commitment to localism, in our view, should be seen as ringing the alarm clock for the FCC, a reminder to wake up and remember the public interest. So in our Google agreement, similar to what Rondella has outlined, there's free broadband after an installation fee, there's some Wi-Fi deployment, and free gigabit service to at least 100 community organizations that serve groups with lower internet penetration rates. And we will incorporate this with additional broadband adoption strategies to help us in our ongoing effort to bridge the digital divide in Portland. These are all positive developments, but without adequate federal regulatory oversight and meaningful conditions on mega mergers, our actions will wither on the vine. And that's why we have joined, and I'm going to skip ahead a couple of slides because they're in the wrong order, of course. That's why we joined with Montgomery County, LA County, Ramsey, Washington County, Minnesota Cable Commission to file comments in the Time Warner Comcast merger. We need enforceable commitments and real competition, as Chair Wheeler talked about at lunch, not just more merger and monopoly. So we specifically asked for items that were outlined in our broadband strategic plan, items that we've been advocating for through the Mount Hood Cable Regulatory Commission for years, and other items that are in our legislative platform. It was very opportunistic, and I'm very grateful for these other entities coming together and allowing us to participate in this important proceeding. Oh, let's see. Okay. So, opportunistic. Filing in that proceeding was very opportunistic. It wasn't any long-range planning goal. The opportunity came up, we joined with other entities, and you too could join with other entities and be opportunistic and file in these important proceedings. And when I say that we're being proactive, we're pursuing broader goals of economic development in conjunction with increased broadband deployment and adoption. And here's some examples. We're using the entire range of tools, and I understand that in each locality it may be different. Look at what tools you have available and use them to their fullest extent. We still enjoy local franchising and authorizing tools, not just the cable, but we're also looking to find common ground with the infrastructure companies to accomplish multiple shared goals. We have the city charter, telecom franchising, cable franchising, broadband, short-term licenses, and we actually are looking at companies like Google, CenturyLink, and Comcast as potential partners, not just regulated industries. And in fact, we have a very successful partnership with Comcast with our institutional network, providing gigabit service to those schools that have requested it. We do maintain a laser-like focus on the need for fiber and the opportunities and jobs it creates and the external savings and service improvements and real competition that it can bring to our community. And what I have for inspiration at my desk is this cartoon, which, in David Eisenberg's words, a big fat pipe all the way to the home. That's our goal. All of us need to have something to inspire us. Also, digital inclusion, as Rondella mentioned, is really important, and we are collaborating with our local partners, particularly the libraries, to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be connected and understands the value proposition. And we're going to have a kickoff Digital Inclusion Summit on November 18th to really bring attention to this issue. And like Austin, we'll be developing a local digital inclusion strategy, and in fact have talked with others here, and are going to form an ad hoc group to collaborate on best practices in developing local digital inclusion strategies. So then, in conclusion, we recognize that localism may not mean the same thing in every community. There are many different ways to accomplish goals in any community, different types of franchises and authorizations, and maybe different types of partnerships. But throughout this, our overall goal remains the same: hastening broadband deployment, developing jobs, and bridging the digital divide. Just as sustainability has become part of our DNA in Portland, we aim to have equity and digital inclusion become part of our DNA. These are examples of localism in action, and we know what localism means in our community, and I trust that you know what localism means in your community. Look for opportunities. October 20th, we're joining with other communities to launch Next Century Cities in Santa Monica. It's a city-to-city initiative to ensure availability of next-generation broadband internet. Our mayor is part of the Cities of Opportunity, as part of the National Conference of Mayors. They have gathered mayors from around the country, and they're developing an action plan to challenge the growing inequality in our country, and a major piece of it is digital inclusion, broadband access, and training. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, the last 2 days had a conference on the East Coast with the Global City Team Challenge. We're participating in that. We're partnering with Intel and some of our higher ed schools like Portland State University and the Technology Association of Oregon to figure out how we can become a smart city. These are all opportunities that any of your communities could participate in, but you need to assert yourself and be aware and find out and say you want to do it. As I told my city council in June, Portland's a city that knows we can't sit on our hands while we wait for the future to arrive. We have to create the future ourselves. And I'd like to leave you with a challenge. As Chair Wheeler said, in a few years there are going to be 50 billion devices in the Internet of Things connected. What does that mean for your community? What opportunities are you going to pursue, and what action are you going to take? I look forward to the support of NATOA members, and I'm very encouraged by the efforts of all NATOA members to keep localism alive. Thank you.
So the message you're hearing is that in responding to mega mergers and to changing markets, you have to be proactive, not just fearful. And what I'm going to talk about is I am going to begin by talking about the status of the mega mergers that are now pending before the FCC, and talk about what you can do or what's left for you to do in connection with those proceedings, and sort of what some of the issues are that are coming up in those proceedings. But then I want to loop back around and talk a little bit about what those mega mergers signal is happening in the market and what you have to be prepared to address. Because I think it's going to affect you financially directly on your budget in terms of franchise fees that are coming in to your communities. I think it will affect you directly in terms of economic development opportunities in your communities and how you compete against a community like Austin or a community like Portland that may have multiple gigabit providers, not just people who say, oh, I offer a gigabit somewhere. Everybody, a lot of people get gigabit service in their communities. Do you get gigabit everywhere in your communities, upstream and downstream to residences and businesses? That's what you don't get. That's what you're talking about with these gigabit systems, and that's what makes them so attractive for economic development. It's non-discriminatory availability. The other area is in terms of social cohesion and community, and that's challenged because essentially we're entering into a market area where the social contract that Chairman Wheeler talked about, that is the obligations to the public, are becoming less clear as we begin, in a legal sense, to wonder what rules apply to what providers. We always knew what applied to common carriers and telephone companies. All of you have 1890s laws that allowed telephone companies to come into your right-of-way, in many cases for free, in return for being regulated and providing universal service and carrying messages neutrally. Now we're talking about people who are building huge systems that occupy your most valuable property and are not necessarily going to be paying anything. So let's go on with the merger issue. There's obviously two gigantic mergers pending. One, which is the one I'm going to spend most of the time talking about, is the Comcast Time Warner Charter Great Land Communications merger. Basically, it's a merger involving the first and second largest cable operators, but it will result in a series of spin-offs under which Charter will become the Charter, if Time Warner and Comcast merge, becomes the second largest cable operator and will be involved in effectively operating a new creation, Great Land Communications. AT&T, meanwhile, is moving forward with its acquisition of DirecTV, which will result, obviously, in a significant change in the way satellite-delivered television relates to wireline-delivered television. Both are pending federal approval. Here's the federal process. It's a two-pronged process, really. There's an antitrust analysis, that's at the bottom. It's either done by the Justice Department or the Federal Trade Commission, in this case by the Justice Department, which essentially looks to see what the antitrust implications of the merger are. The one I'm going to focus on is the one at the top, which is the FCC's process. The FCC is responsible for looking at deciding whether the mergers are in the public interest. So that is a much broader standard, and what the companies have to do in order to obtain a merger or obtain approval is to show the commission that merging is in the public interest. It's to the benefit, right? It's not just that it happens, it's good for us, it's that it will benefit the public. And both and as part of the whole process of both the AT&T merger and the Comcast merger, Comcast Time Warner merger and the Charter transaction, public interest filings were made at the FCC where the companies contended in all these cases that the merger wasn't just something neutral, but it should be approved because it would help people. Here are the dockets. The AT&T docket is MB 1490. We'll be posting these online, giving them to NATOA and also at our BBK knowledge page. Response comments will be due October 16th. Those will be AT&T's responses to comments that were filed September 16th. And then replies in that proceeding will be due November 5th. I think for a lot of communities, the concern there is that you lost a lot of franchising power in a lot of states when AT&T promised to build out a UVerse system that would bring advanced services via wireline to communities. Now we're looking at a situation where potentially AT&T will not be expanding its UVerse services, but will in fact be putting most of its dollars into wireless service and to delivering video by satellite. And at that point, you not only won't get the franchise fees that were often anticipated under state laws, but you may lose a lot of PEG resources or PEG outlets that I think your states envisioned would be provided. MB 1457 is the Comcast Time Warner Charter docket. Initial comments were filed on August 25th. There were almost 12,000 comments filed that day, and most of them in opposition. The responses were filed by Comcast on September 23rd, and the reply comments are now due on October 8th. Now, this is an FCC proceeding, which means that while these deadlines are important, you can also make filings if you miss the deadlines through something called the ex parte process. But I want to tell, when Mary Beth was talking about what Portland did, it's important for you to recognize that if you like the sort of issues Portland was addressing, October 8th is a date you can send a letter to the FCC to say you need to do something about this merger. Because if you don't, I can guarantee you the company is going to be moving forward to say approve it without conditions. And I'll go into a little more detail as we go on. So here's some more detail on who was seeking conditions: Boston, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Montgomery County, NATOA, CETOA, the Public Telecommunications Institute, the Alliance for Community Media, and the Alliance for Communications Democracy. You also had a lot of companies like Netflix file saying we should either deny or condition significantly, and all were concerned with the increased market power this company would have. 50 mayors filed in support of the petition, and several organizations, Consumers Union, Public Knowledge, and the Open Technology Institute filed in opposition, saying you should just deny this flat out. There is no way you're going to be able to condition this in a way that will protect the public interest. So here's what the major conditions were, and I won't spend long on these because actually the list that Mary Beth gave you was pretty complete. Basically, there were a lot of folks who filed saying the Internet Essentials program that was established as part of the NBC Universal merger, because the FCC was concerned that when Comcast merged with NBC Universal, there would be some significant impacts on Internet access, that program has been ineffective. It has not worked in any community in terms of the way it was expected to work, and it was not designed or conditioned in a way that would allow people who are underserved to get the level of service that's required to meet modern needs. That is to say, while the program, and when the program initially started out, there were very low adoption rates because the internet service that was offered was just very low quality. Right now you get a 5 megabit service, which isn't bad, but we know that over time, as you could hear from Chairman Wheeler, 5 megabits isn't going to be enough either. So if we're talking about a basic level of service that ought to be provided by a company that will have massive control over a significant amount of last mile infrastructure, one of the things these communities said is you need to improve this program, you need to make it longer term, and you need to make sure we're getting service not just to areas that the company wants to pass, but to areas that are actually underserved that happen to be within their franchise areas. Several people suggested that Comcast ought to be subject to open internet conditions. That is, we shouldn't allow a company to gain as much control as they'll have without committing to an open internet. Another thing Chairman Wheeler mentioned, you should protect consumers, including the availability to use alternate end equipment, Roku boxes, and other devices that are used to control video. And there should be conditions on local programming, allowing PEG support to be used for operations, ensuring PEG providers are able to take advantage of the capabilities of the system for HD, program guide access, and so on. And also conditions to maximize competitive entry potential. Because a lot of things, and some of you will be running into this in franchise negotiations, is insistence by Comcast on a level playing field clause that has one purpose, which is to cut back on local commitments if you allow a Google Fiber to enter the market. And I got to tell you, Comcast is very upset at Portland because Google Fiber is not going to be paying a PEG fee, Comcast says, and that's unfair. Well, what Google Fiber is doing is building fiber to the home and providing other connections that Comcast doesn't provide. These things don't have to be permanent, but there are public benefits that come from having fiber to the home that are also important. But what the companies are now seeking to do is to say, we're going to make it very hard for you to aggressively allow competitive entry of alternative systems that could be used for video delivery. So one thing that was asked for was, let's not let big companies keep other people out of the marketplace. And the last was, don't just apply these conditions to Comcast Time Warner, This charter company is going to be pretty big too, and so is Greatland, which is going to be operated by charter. That's what was proposed by local government. I'll go into the response Comcast gave in a second, but I think if you like those issues, I come back to you need to file. And I want to mention one other thing just as an aside. A lot of communities have local review processes or had an opportunity to engage in local review processes with respect to these transactions. For the communities we represent, I know Brian Grogan is here and he's represented, Mike Bradley's here. We just got new information that suggests that there are some significant changes in the proposed spin-off to the Greatland communications system that makes it likely, or seems to me renders the initial 394s that were filed, the transfer applications that were filed, either inaccurate or incomplete. Those of you who missed the opportunity to get involved in that debate the first time around when these applications were first filed may want to go back and review that, because you may want to revisit your involvement in this review process at the local level. So just an alert. Why were these communities filing? Well, I've already mentioned some of the reasons, but I just want to give some graphic pictures. Post-merger, this is what the national picture would look like in terms of control of communication systems. Now, you'll see I've left out DirecTV, right, which is a video provider. But if we take Chairman Wheeler's point that what we want is 25 megabits to the home, what I'm concerned about is who controls the wireline connections that can actually deliver 25 megabits to the home. And when you look at it from that perspective, what you find is that after this merger, Comcast is going to control about 50% of the market, Charter's another 13%, and the rest is all divided up. And what's interesting is how few, it's significant, but how few communities actually will, how little of the market will actually have competition from a second provider, right? You have Verizon and UVerse. They're significant, but it's a small portion of the market. And as Chairman Wheeler suggested, that means that the vast majority of Americans will have one option for 25 megabit service to the home. And that's what concerns a lot of people, because as you get bigger, you're in a position to exclude entrants into the market, to exclude alternatives. It also actually has a more dramatic effect because it effectively consolidates systems and clusters in California, New England, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, Oregon, Washington, and Virginia. That's where Comcast becomes basically the sole provider, while Charter gains in Ohio, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Alabama. And because it will be operating the Greatland system after a year and potentially has an option to control it, you actually see the entire Midwest effectively becoming a Charter system. And these are in the context of a court decision that struck down the FCC's net neutrality rules, which essentially prevented discrimination in the provision of internet service, an FCC decision that allows Verizon Wireless to sell Comcast services outside the Verizon Fios footprint and allows Comcast to send Verizon Wireless out. Why is that significant? Because as everybody recognized when that was done, it suggests that Verizon is not going to be expanding its system aggressively to compete against Comcast because their wireless division benefits from this arrangement. And finally, there's an announcement of a possible order classifying linear over-the-top providers as multi-channel video programming distributors. I put in so many initials I had to put in question marks after that bullet point. Essentially what the commission has suggested it may do, although in a blog post today Chairman Wheeler said it's not imminent, is that it may classify folks who are delivering video services via the internet in packages as multi-channel video programming distributors, meaning that under the Cable Act, they will have the right to acquire programming on a non-discriminatory basis from program providers, and companies like Comcast won't be able, who was accused basically of going around and telling providers, I don't want you to sell your programming to over-the-top producers. So how does that translate? How does this affect mega mergers? Well, if these folks now have programming, it will now be, Comcast will now have a strong incentive to use its system or develop its system in a way that will prevent them from providing direct competition to the home, and consumers will have an interest in making sure that those providers can get to the home, and you as a franchising authority will have an interesting position because these over-the-top providers won't be paying you franchise fees. So it's going to be an interesting development, and it changes the dynamic of the way you franchise and what the issues are in play. So local governments were involved because there's all these economic developments going on that challenge the ability of the community to continue to function in a modern world. So what did Comcast say when these comments were filed? No one submitted an economic study that was as good as the one we submitted. We showed you the merger was good, that's good. And actually on this point, I gotta say, it would have been much better had communities gotten together and funded an economic study. It's not too late, but you know, it's useful. A lot of communities filed, but none of the community filings was supported by an economic study, and that would have been nice. They argue there's no impact on video competition because there is no competition in video, and there's no impact on the broadband market because there is no impact on the broadband market. And then Ars Technica referred to this as a fantasy filing, but it's a significant filing at the FCC. They said you don't need to deal with any issues like PEG or local concentration or any localism issues because we deal on a case-by-case basis with franchising issues, and you don't need to establish a federal standard to address franchise issues because we're addressing it in negotiations all over the country and we're being very responsive to localities. Now, those of you who are in franchise negotiations may have a different view of how the negotiations are going that way. And if you are, here's something you may want to respond to. Is the company really being responsive on a case-by-case basis, or are we seeing a nationalization of the Comcast response? And no condition should be extended to Great Land or Charter, so there's a footnote that says Internet Essentials, however inadequate it is, will not be apply in Detroit or any of the Michigan communities that are switching to Great Land or any of the communities in the Midwest. No improvements to Internet Essentials are appropriate anyway. No additional PEG requirement should be imposed. No broadband or net neutrality condition should be imposed. No customer service conditions because there's no showing customer service will get worse because of the merger. Now, that's an interesting point, is can it get any worse if we merge? However, I would argue that under a public interest standard, before you allow a company to acquire market power, which an economist will tell you should lead to reduced output and reduced incentives to provide good service, you might want to require at a minimum that customer service be improved. And finally, one of the things local government said was, let us enforce things, because the last time around you put in these NBC Universal conditions on Internet Essentials and really nothing effective happened. So local government said, let us be your partners. And Comcast says, you can't let them be your partners, they can't be your partners, end of story. So that's the framework. That's now the arguments to which local governments need to respond, and as I mentioned before, silence doesn't work. It works only in one entity's favor, not in yours. So if you don't file something, don't be surprised if the merger is improved without locally important conditions. I will tell you, other people are filing, not local governments. Netflix, the content, the edge providers, they're all going to be coming in. The question is local government going to be present in the second round? So here's some issues you're going to see no matter how all these things are filed. We've seen the triple play and the impact on franchise fees and how bundling can lead to complication in calculating what amounts are doing. We're now seeing a developing quad play, which is the development of wireless systems that are connected to the cable system that essentially are used as an alternative for mobile wireless service, okay? So how many of you have connected to the Xfinity Wi-Fi systems or the Time Warner Wi-Fi systems? A few of you. If you haven't done it, in most Comcast communities, a lot of Comcast communities, if you go around, you'll all of a sudden see something called Xfinity Wi-Fi that shows up that you can connect to for free if you're a Comcast subscriber. In Austin, when I did this, there's a similar system set up for Time Warner. You can connect to Wi-Fi by Time Warner, and as you walk along the street, your device connects to the next Wi-Fi terminal. So what does that mean you can do? That means instead of paying my cell phone provider for service, I can use a regular Wi-Fi connection to make a Skype call as I'm walking along, right? Or Comcast can begin to provide backhaul for cellular providers for a fee to fill in some of the gaps that are in their signal. And that's what you're going to see, is you're going to see Comcast, Time Warner, and other companies begin to say, I need to have a wireless and mobile option in addition to my typical at-home service. So how are you also seeing this played out? Many of you have also seen the rollout of modems that actually create a mesh network in your communities. The modems are in the subscriber home, and in addition to providing the subscriber an internet connection, they allow anyone else to connect to that connection as well. It's supposedly distinct from the subscriber's internet connection. It would have an Xfinity device, but the subscriber ends up paying, obviously, for the power for the device and the other, and obviously has people connecting to their device. There are some security issues that are of some significance. And you're going to be seeing that happen, and you're going to be seeing, and Mary Beth mentioned the Internet of Things, the company emphasizing not only its security offering, but other offerings that are intended to allow it to control or to provide connectivity for all types of home devices that we expect to be connected to the Internet over the next 5 years. We're talking when Mary Beth says it, and the chairman mentioned it, we're talking billions of devices. Everything from public health devices, things that allow you to monitor people who have severe health problems, to devices that allow you to determine whether you're low on milk or the milk is old, things like that. Everything. It's going to change the way you do things. And the question you ask from a purely selfish perspective might be, do I get a share of revenues from that? Is that cable service under my franchise fee? Or am I going to see a shift in revenues so that my franchise fee revenues, cable service revenues will drop, but the value of these systems in the right-of-way, and hence the value of my property and the rights I'm granting to them, that's actually increasing, okay? One of the things I mentioned is 447 USC, and this is an incorrect. I said 442H, it's 542H. So this is a terrible mistake I made because I typed my own PowerPoints. And, but basically, that says that that's a provision of the Cable Act, often forgotten, that gives localities the right to charge a 5% fee to anyone who's providing service that travels via a cable system where the revenue is not received by the cable operator. So federal law doesn't prohibit those charges. State law might, but federal law doesn't. Something that localities need to start thinking about right now, because the way the business is changing, your franchise fee rules are no longer significant. It also tells you to be careful in drafting your franchises. You're going to have to think about what facilities are attached to the cable system. All these Wi-Fi devices going up, they're not the cable system. By the definition, a cable system is a closed network. Okay, and a Wi-Fi system is not a closed network. So are they getting authorization to put those devices in your right-of-way? How do those relate to your zoning laws? And when we get the DAS, the wireless order, we're going to ask one question you're going to want to look at is, if I allow a Wi-Fi system to be attached to a utility pole, have I suddenly made that utility pole a facility to which someone can attach any type of communications antenna of significant size? So those are going to be big issues as these technologies merge. How do we deal with the mobile population on our own PEG communications? You heard Rondella say how they're using it in Austin. When we're talking about a neutral net, when we're talking about the importance of an open internet, I can't think of anyone the open internet is more important to than government, because all of government's moving to e-basis. And you need to think about what are the consumer rights, how do we deal with rate regulation when we're seeing a lot of charges show up on bills that are not justified and might be regulatable under consumer protection. It requires us to start thinking outside of our cable regulation box into a new world. And we also need to think about whether we need to develop our own alternatives. So that's all a lot of things to think about. But with that, I'm going to end my presentation, and I think we can throw things open to questions.
Okay, we have a mic in the center of the room if we have any questions. All right, while you are formulating your questions, Joe, you were just talking about some of the wireless uses of the cable system and the fact that, at least according to the cable company, the use of the modem in a subscriber's home is separate from their own internal network that they get from the cable company. Have you heard, and I'll open this up to anyone else because it's an issue that I've just heard recently, but I don't know the answer to it. whether the use of a subscriber's cable modem actually increases the energy use that's required to power that modem. In other words, are we as cable subscribers paying slightly higher energy bills to our electric company to allow our cable operator to have a neighborhood Wi-Fi network?
I saw a post on this that it had a Comcast response, and the answer was that initial testing showed a significant increase in energy consumption based on these modems. Comcast responded that those modems are being replaced with more efficient modems that use more energy than a single-use modem, but not very much more. So there is a price differential. The amount I couldn't quantify right now.
Questions? Garth has a question. Garth is just coming back to his seat. All right, please identify yourself and your jurisdiction.
Bob Cardinal from Ramsey, Washington, Cable Commission. Say, Rondella, you mentioned that there was 8%, the statistic of residents do not use the internet. How did you come to that?
We conducted a survey. It was based, we did a sampling of 15,000. We partnered with our University of Texas, and we, through that process is what we came up with the amount.
Brian?
Hi, this is a question for Rondella, I think. Also, you mentioned that Google was offering 100 gigabit connections for kind of public interest type institutions. Have any of the other fiber to the home entrants proposed something similar, or just curious about that? Or has Google been the only one, and is it purely voluntary, or how does that work?
Well, currently, Google is the only provider providing the free gig connections at this time, and we're hoping to have ongoing discussions and work some other program out with the other providers.
And Mary Beth, has Google made a similar offer in Portland for public interest type connections?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's part of the public benefit package in the franchise.
And one last question along these lines. Are they proposing also some kind of connections for low-income housing, public housing, and so forth? I believe in Kansas City they're working with a nonprofit that, so it's not part of the Google Fiber, but it's affiliated. Can you?
In Austin, well, first, Google, besides the 1 gig service that they provide, there is the 5 meg one down service with in Kansas, it was a one-time $300 construction fee with no ongoing monthly service fees. We don't know what the pricing structure is in Austin. There are some discussions with the Austin Housing Authority and Google Fiber for digital inclusion programs, and we have quite a few nonprofits in Austin that are committed to digital inclusion, and I can see some type of a partnership or program being developed.
Hi, Jerry Musial, West Dallas, Wisconsin. You kind of showed Rondella in some of your graphics, and we were talking at lunch that I guess the competition did affect the services. You know, Universe and Grande and Time Warner kind of responded to Google bolstering their services. Can all of you kind of address the urban legend where competition lowers rates? And will it?
Well, in Austin, I hope that the chart did depict that we did see an impact or a reduction in the cost per megabyte in broadband in cost. We've not looked at, that was only broadband, we've not looked at cable rates across the board.
Well, and I think that competition may dampen increases and improve speeds. It may not necessarily actually lower prices, but I think it's definitely in the public interest to have dampening on the on increases and have better speeds, higher bandwidth available for the same price. That's what I think we might see, but the folks who are planning to roll fiber have not yet done so to the home CenturyLink has just begun to roll fiber to the home, but it hasn't been very long in the process. So we have yet to see what that might do to our local market.
And I think the FCC's price survey tends to show that if it's a municipal network that's competing, you definitely see price drops, and of real significance. And those are efforts to prevent, essentially prevent the municipality from entering the market. If you can get enough of folks tied up in 1- and 2-year deals, that's fine. But we also did see in some markets where you had new entrants entering, that the companies would send out people, I believe this happened in some of the Google communities, that folks were sent out to communities to try to sign up people in Google areas in order to prevent them from signing up for Google Fiber. So they're not a lowering of the rate card price, but you may all of a sudden get special deals in special neighborhoods.
And I'll add to that, because there are different kinds of services to different kinds of entities that we need to talk about when we're talking about competition and impacting prices. So if you look at some of the BTOP programs, and it'll be interesting to see a few years from now how some of those community anchor programs on a broader level have impacted prices. But I can speak with a little bit of authority about the EagleNet project in Colorado, which was not without its controversy and was challenged significantly by a variety of political forces, both the industry and at the legislative level. And while it has not ended up becoming a statewide network yet, it 4 years after it started, is providing broadband service to schools and libraries in a much, much larger footprint than before the project. Not only has it resulted in lower prices from EagleNet to those community anchor institutions, but in the latest round of E-rate contracts, there were some school districts where EagleNet actually lost their contract because companies like CenturyLink came in and bid faster speeds at lower rates than they were bidding 3 or 4 years ago when there was no competition for those services. So as a result of competition, whether it was the government-owned network or not that was getting the service through the E-rate bidding program, it was a gain for the community anchor institutions that wanted to buy those services. Mike.
Mike Wassenaar from the Alliance for Community Media. I really appreciate everyone's perspectives here today. I've got a question, press for you most, Joe. If Mary Beth or Rondella, you want to take this on, that's great, and maybe for other people in the room. And it has to do with the rebuttal round in the Comcast merger comments. And the remark that you made, Joe, about those LFAs that are currently in negotiations that have dragged on for years in many cases, draining local resources. It would be useful for them to come forth to talk about the case-by-case evidence of Comcast's inability to actually work with local government. We know these cases anecdotally, but it's very, very hard for us to actually look at the documentary record based upon the things that someone says to us over the bar or in a casual conversation over a conference call. So I just want to get, and I'm sensitive to the sensitive nature of these discussions as well, and the confidential nature often that happens in terms of LFAs. So I'm just going to get your perspectives on exactly what it takes to be able to have someone come forward to actually document the failure of the corporation to meet local needs, to rebut what is essentially, to my mind, a lie.
Well, I think it would be difficult just because of the way the negotiations are going on to actually, you'd have to be able to say, but I know some people could say it as, we've been told that these decisions are made at the corporate level, not at the local level. So folks know the experience, they can say it, but I gotta say the other answer to this is, there are a lot of states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, California, where there's no local input because there's no local franchising. So if we're talking about conditions, for example, or even in Texas, for example, if we're talking about high definition, program guide, those things were never addressed by the state laws, which always assumed that there would be competition. The whole point of the state law was, we'll have more competition. Well, in a world where there's going to be less competition, maybe the federal government needs to step up and say, I've got most population centers in the United States now under state franchising, not local franchising.
All right, any other questions? Yep, got a few more minutes.
Hey, thanks, you guys. That's great. Just a question maybe for Joe. I know like California Emerging Technology Fund has filed comments and some great comments on the merger, calling in part for some advisory oversight committee on the Internet Essentials program and some local granting in a way with to partner with community-based organizations on marketing. And was wondering in part if there's FCC is doing anything to provide data by counties on adoption and also on sort of the amount of investment on marketing for their essentials or for any of the other low-income broadband programs.
I honestly don't know. There's a whole set of data that you have to sign up for a confidentiality order to look. You have to sign an NDA to look at, and I haven't had any reason to look at it. So I can't tell you whether the FCC is looking at that data or not. What I can tell you is that study you're referring to, which essentially argued that the Internet Essentials program had been ineffective, is heavily criticized by Comcast in its response. Basically, Comcast says the data is all wrong, and the Internet Essentials program is much more successful than CETF says. CETF basically had more statistics than we saw in any other information that was filed on this program. We pointed to their filing heavily. I think others did as well. And the argument Comcast is making is the data is wrong and the Internet Essentials program is working pretty well. I know a lot of you are concerned about Internet Essentials. You've offered to cooperate with Comcast on Internet Essentials, and you like the idea of the program. But Comcast's response was essentially, it's working as well as you need to make it work.
Really quickly on a very related subject. As most of you who are familiar with Internet Essentials know, it's a program that came out of the merger as a kind of a condition, and now they're saying it's going to go on indefinitely. And the basis is who qualifies for free and reduced lunch in the public schools, right? Generally. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was really interesting to read a headline recently that the city of Philadelphia has announced that now all students in public schools qualify for free and reduced lunch. And I'm wondering if anyone in the room has heard if that means that therefore Internet Essentials will be expanded in Philadelphia or elsewhere where this happens.
Anybody from Philadelphia here want to comment on that? I will say this, and for communities that are LFAs that have one school district, there is a way to look and see how many students are taking the Internet Essential programs. But many of us live in communities that where our cities are part of a larger school district that has multiple municipalities or possibly multiple school districts serving one municipality, and there is no way that Comcast has been able to provide the data for those communities to know how is it working in my city. Are the schools in my city taking this at 5% of the kids who are on free and reduced school lunch, or 85% of the kids at free and reduced school? And they claim they can't break that down by school because it would be a privacy issue. Mm-hmm. So there's, it may be working great in my town, but my city is part of a countywide school district that has multiple cities involved, and there's no way that my city council can get a feel for how effective the program is or is not. So when we look at ways to improve that program, if we're going to improve it, that's one way we need to look at. Okay. Garth. Now Garth has a question. We're running out of time.
Just curious. I've seen the word indefinitely used, and I've heard it used. Can anybody tell me if indefinitely is next week or next year or 10 years from now?
I mean, is the Internet Essentials program, are they?
It was essentially, folks can correct me, I think it was essentially a 3-year program of yeah. And then it was extended, and now it's being extended indefinitely. The question is, does that mean forever, or does that mean until we decide we don't want to do it? That's obviously the issue Garth's raising, but it's a fair issue to raise with the FCC.
Right. And frankly, there's a whole nother legal issue, because even if the FCC did say indefinitely, then there's it's called a voluntary condition, right? So not to get too far into the legal weeds, but frankly, one of the commissioners, I think it was McDowell, who dissented in the NBCU case, said, if it's voluntary, how can it be enforceable? And if we have the authority to impose the condition, why are we letting them call it voluntary? And it's, if you just want to put on your lawyer hats and think about that one, it's a good question. So how enforceable any of these voluntary conditions are over the long term, I think, is subject to debate in the future. Right. The comment was, as former Commissioner Copps has said, there's been little to no enforcement on any of the conditions that were imposed in the prior mergers. All right, let's thank our panelists once again for a great discussion. Thank you all. We're going to have a refreshment break now, and Joe's buying. Thank you, Best and Krieger, for the refreshment break, and we'll see you at the next session. Thank you.